Hi, I'm Nathanael.
And I'm Nick. This is Lab 4, Group 3B.
So this part of the lab, we have a mirror right behind, about focal length behind a reference lens. And so what will happen is the beam, because it's focused, this is basically a flat mirror, the beam will get reflected back and will be collimated. So here we have the lens at position 1, and it's getting the beam collimated back, and then we can move it back. And then here's position 2, and we find that this is 200 millimeters away, so the radius of curvature is 200 millimeters. So here we can see the fringes at position 1, and here we see the fringes at position 2.
We first tried our original objective from last week with an 8.5 millimeter focal length, which did not fill up our shear plate. We then used a 0.65 numerical aperture, which, after looking up, had a focal length of 4.5 millimeters. Using our beam expander ratio formula, we were able to calculate that we would fill up 87.2% of the shear plate, or 43.6 millimeters out of 50 millimeters. After calculating the optimal spatial filter size, we selected the 10 micron filter to be able to filter out the noise and aberrations. However, due to a dirty filter, we were not able to get it to work. We therefore had to use a larger filter, which increased the noise and aberrations, allowing more light to go through.
There are two different types of shear plates. One, which we use in lab, is called a wedge shear plate because there's a wedge. Now, the usefulness of the wedge is that when the beam is collimated, there are horizontal fringes present. However, the other type, the non-wedge shear plate, when it's collimated, no fringes are present. So the non-wedge shear plates are actually more sensitive because when you use a wedge one and get horizontal fringes, they might not be perfectly horizontal, whereas the other one, you know when you have no fringes. So therefore, the non-wedge is a lot more sensitive. But because of how the converging and diverging fringes work, you can't tell which direction you are. So it's best to use the wedge shear plate to get close and then use the non-wedge to get it perfect. So this is how we test a short focal length mirror. First, we flip the shear plate around so that the collimated beam goes through. It's a high quality reference lens that'll focus the beam down, and then we put the mirror behind this lens. First, we position the mirror so that it's at the focal point of the lens. Right here, the mirror will act like a flat so that it will reflect the beam back and it will be collimated after the lens and hit the shear plate. We then move the mirror back some until we hit the point where the laser beam going through the lens will hit the mirror, get focused back at the focal point of the lens, and then get reflected back through the system, collimated again. The distance between mirror position A and B will then be the radius of the mirror. For the long focal length mirror, we have the same setup as before, but minus the reference lens. And what we do is we just have the mirror focus the light back into the shear plate as before, and then we measure SD and alpha, move the mirror back again, and do the same thing. For the long focal length lens, we move the shear plate back to its normal position, and we put the test lens in front of it. The lens will focus some light in, and then we just measure SD and alpha for two different lens positions, and then do the math.
Using the equations given to us in class, we were able to calculate the radiuses as shown. The results for mirror 1 happened to be alpha was equal to 75 degrees, D is equal to 2 millimeters, and the shear distance is 5 millimeters. The only difference for mirror 2 was that the shear distance was 6 millimeters instead of 5. After this lab, we were able to learn more about the shear plate and the differences between the wedged and non-wedged. During our alignment of the spatial filter, we learned that a dirty filter can hinder our alignment big time, and that the noise and aberrations from using a larger filter are enhanced. During our beam expanding, we learned that to make sure to calculate the magnification needed to get a 2-inch beam first, and then pick the objective in order to minimize our time. We also learned 3 ways to testing the radius of curvature and the focal length of a lens or mirror. That if we have a mirror with a large radius of curvature, to test it using a long test unless we have enough optical railing for the short test.